So what we'll do in this speech is summarize and synthesize exactly what we've seen throughout this round. We're not going to make new arguments. We're not going to read new evidence that hasn't already been read in the round. And I expect the affirmative speaker to do the same in their speech, because at this point in the round, the debate is over. What we're going to do is look at what we've seen. So let's talk about, firstly, the dropped arguments of the round. The first dropped argument you can tag as national security information risk. National security information risk. This is the argument I made talking about how Guantanamo Bay inmates have information that they possess that's dangerous. And we talked about this in cross-examination, and it was admitted that they didn't have any idea what kind of information this might be. And this was the very first cross-examination of the round, and yet the argument stands at the end of the round because they did not respond to it. And that leads to our second dropped argument, which you can write down as 90% could be 2%. 90% could be 2%, and I'm going to impact this to this 2% statistic because what we've seen is an admittance in cross-examination that they do not have access to all of the federal court trials that ever happened, which means that that 700 number that they're giving to you could actually be 1,500. It could be something drastically different than the number they're actually giving to you. They only selected 700. That doesn't mean that they actually have access to all of the numbers. That means that it could be 2%, 660 out of 66,000, if that were actually the case. And so because the affirmative team fails that burden, that argument has been dropped and flows negative. And that impacts back to the solvency, or rather the significance of this case. And voting issue number 1, you can write down as fails resolution. Fails resolution. And we'll have 2 subpoints here. Subpoint A is not towards nations. Not towards nations. And rather simply, their failure to uphold the resolution means that they lose the debate round regardless of what we've seen throughout it. And that's unfortunate, but it's the way debate works. And we'll establish that by first looking at their response to our subpoint A, not toward nations. They said that their definition had a paragraph-long definition that they did not have time to read, and yet they chose to read the very definition that Dr. Herman said specifically was no longer suitable for this context. And therefore, their own definition defeats itself. Simply put, the affirmative loses the round on this issue alone. But subpoint B, 7 trials. 7 trials. Now, they said that these 7 trials are significant because they're regarding 9/11. Well, yes, the criminals themselves are absolutely significant, and we need to seek justice for them. But we won't get justice if we transfer them over, then they escape because we don't have the suitable protection in the United States to secure them. And that's important because the affirmative team at this point in the round, and therefore at the end of the round, has lost this argument. They haven't proven a significant problem because we already have them detained. Now, voting issue number 2 is too dangerous. Too dangerous. It's disastrous for national security. I'm sure you can impact this in your own mind, but what I'll do here is explain exactly what the problem is. We'd rather, the worst case scenario, if in fact we cede all of the ground from the affirmative team, if we say that these are going to wait indefinitely, we would rather all 7 cases wait indefinitely for all eternity than have them come to the United States and cause a national security information or a national security attack threat. That is the worst case scenario. If we give all of the evidence to the affirmative team and every single argument they've made, the worst case scenario for the negative team is that all 7 cases wait. And that's something that we're willing to pay the price for if it's more secure, which it is according to the evidence that we've seen thus far in the round, and therefore at the end of the round, because again, we're just synthesizing the arguments. Now, voting issue number 3 is that of evidence. Evidence. Now, subpoint B, you can write as no evidence given. No evidence given. And I will read the note from the affirmative team in their 1AC. It says that, note, some of the evidence in this 1AC is summarized for clarity. We can provide full copies of the original evidence upon request, but only if they hand us a limerick in prep time. Just kidding. But that's what the evidence said, and it's comedic, and it's funny, and hopefully memorable. But what's important is that we didn't get to experience the laugh that that joke has, because if you're going to read the 1AC in your speech and then expect the negative team to read the same 1AC all the way through in their 5 minutes of prep time that you just spent 8 minutes reading, then that's not going to fulfill the burden of proof. They haven't actually read this note, and unless they read the note in the debate round, it doesn't apply. They need to clarify, and what we really didn't see was the actual evidence read. That's the easy response from the affirmative team, is just to read the full context of the evidence, but they failed to do so at this point of the round. That leads us to a response, also fact 2 was misconstrued because it said all believe failed instead of all workshop participants believe that it fails. And at the end of this round, a debate is still to be had. There's still a debate on whether the affirmative team topic is acceptable or not. But simply put, That debate hasn't started yet, and therefore the affirmative team fails the burden.